Hi, my name is Lindy Howlett, and I will be presenting on humanistic theory for my midterm presentation. So, what is humanistic theory's main focus? Well, the main focus of humanistic theory is on productivity through people, specifically, which is different from the main focus of classical theory, which also was on productivity, but not through people. It was through other means to achieve efficiency. The overall arching idea behind humanistic theory is that if you improve the lives of the individual employees, you will eventually improve the overall health of the organization. So, the idea with humanistic theory is that no one can force someone to give more effort than what they want to. So, a manager cannot force an employee to give more effort at their job than what they want to give. However, that discretion between what they want to give and the effort they give above that is where true productivity lies. So, how do you create an environment that encourages employees to give more than what they're required to without forcing them? Well, this video covers the Hawthorne plant studies, which was an early research study into humanistic theory, which developed out of classical theory because they saw the problems that relied uh, on classical theory when you were using classical theory. So I'm going to play this video that explains the studies very well.
In 1900s, management theories changed as researchers focused on the workers. These theories were referred to as humanistic or behavioral because they considered the employees' attitudes, behaviors, and social needs. The human relation movement was tested extensively in the Hawthorne plant of Western Electric, where worker productivity was tested over a variety of changing conditions, including lighting changes, pay incentives, and group pay incentives. Researchers found that workers developed their own unspoken system of performance. They set a productivity level, and workers who produced less or more were looked at unfavorably. This was strong support for the power of group norms. Another theory that emerged was known as Theory X and Y. Theory X managers assume people don't like to work, so they need to be forced to work through threats and punishment. Theory Y managers assume that employees do like to work, and they reward employees by giving them more power and responsibility within the organization. Managers enable employees to work to their highest potential. The humanistic movement kicked off the management research trend to focus on the employees' attitudes, behaviors, and social needs, and set the stage for modern-day management practices and research.
All right, that was a great video, and I think it really demonstrated the difference between classical theory and humanistic theory very well. And the theory Y, which was based off of the humanistic theory, is that employer believes in their employee and believes that they want to work and have intrinsic value. And when you treat an employee like that, they begin to really accept that. But when you treat an employee like Theory X treated their employees, um, it really provides negative setbacks, which we can see in the classical theory. So I really liked what Brother Embry said in his introduction video on the difference between classical theory and humanistic theory for week 4, the introduction video. So I wanted to demonstrate that really fast. I liked what he said about how the classical theory disadvantages mirrored the opposite of the humanistic theory advantages. So we can see that the disadvantages of classical theory include having lower morale, whereas humanistic theory advantages include having higher morale. But the rest of the disadvantages of classical theory include that the employees feel like they're cogs in a machine. There's lower innovation. People are just going through the motions of their everyday job. They're not really giving more effort than what they should be. And then there's a lot of higher turnover in the classical theory model. So with the rest of the advantages of the humanistic theory, um, instead of feeling like cogs in a machine, employees feel really valued when the humanistic theory principles are applied correctly. And contrastly to classical theory, there's higher innovation because in turn, employees are going to feel like they can give more effort than what is required of them and they can go above and beyond the expectations. So that is where productivity and innovation lies within that threshold. And then also there's low turnover because the employees actually really enjoy their job when they're in a proper humanistic organization. So I also really liked how Brother Embry mentioned Elder Bednar had three principles of a successful organization in long term. And I couldn't necessarily find where he spoke in a talk. And so I went back into the video and it said that he had heard Elder Bednar give these principles in a meeting, which I believe was private and not published on online. So his three principles were number one, to attract good people, meaning employees, that you want genuinely good, moral, ethical people to work for you. Number two, you want to establish clear expectations for performance. And usually this is done by clarifying a mission statement or values that you repeated around your organization. And number three, you want your employees to be willing to exceed expectations, right? So it goes back to the um, principle of how you can't force somebody to give more effort than what they want to give. But you want to create an organization where your employees are willing to exceed expectations, even though that's not required of them. So I wanted to compare two organizations, one that we talked about in the video, the Taj Mumbai Hotel, and one that I talked about with my husband, who's in the U.S. Army in the military. And his company is the organization I've been studying this semester. But I wanted to highlight the humanistic principles from both. So number one, for the Taj Mumbai Hotel is to attract good people, and the Taj Mumbai did this by recruiting from poor areas, which the people they recruited would value the opportunity they were given. So it worked really effectively for them. Um, in the army, they want very specific values in a person. So they don't necessarily need somebody who's going to be insanely physically fit right off the bat, but they do need somebody who's going to have determination because physical fitness can be increased and practiced over time and get better, but determination and perseverance is something that's very hard to teach. So the reason why basic training is grueling is not because the rest of their career matches that same physical intensity. It really doesn't. Because basic training is probably the most physically intense thing that you will do in your army career. So the reason why it's grueling up front is because they want to sift out the people who aren't willing to stick it out and who don't have the determination to make it all the way through, because that's very hard to teach somebody. So the second principle is to establish clear expectations for performance, and the Taj Mumbai did this very well by using the motto to delight the guests. The employees at the hotel knew the motto, they recited it often, and they embodied it fully in their organization. Similar in the Army, you hear the core values the moment you step into basic training for the rest of your career. And my husband could recite it off the top of his head in his sleep. I asked him, and he said it very fast, and then he slowed it down so I could write it. He said that the core values are loyalty, duty, respect, selfless service, honor, integrity, and personal courage. And that's really ingrained into you the entire time you're in the Army. Number three is having employees that are willing to exceed expectations. And I think this is really important for most organizations, but I noticed in the Mumbai hotel why it was important. And that's because during the terrorist attack, these employees, specifically out of the other hotels that were also attacked, were the only ones to band together and protect the guests. They definitely did not have to do that. They were not any sort of obligation beyond providing a good hotel experience for the guests, but they did because they really believed in the mission. They cared about everybody they were working with, their management, and this was their lifestyle. So they really protected the guests because they really, really cared about the guests. Now, on the Army side, this is a life or death situation. When you're on a mission, you want to feel confident that the person next to you will do everything they can to keep you alive. So, most soldiers can do the job that they are assigned to from point A to point B and just call it good, and that will be their job, and they'll get paid and they can leave at the end of the day. But when they're on deployment, it is imperative that the people you work with truly, truly care about you and their life. And you want people next to you that will help you because you will help them. And that it's not going to be every man for himself on deployment, and that there really is going to be a camaraderie and a brotherhood essentially between all of the men that work with each other. So I think this is really important and it really applies for a small scale military experience. Also, I studied a business article from Harvard, and they talked about two different terms that I think are really eye-opening. And it has to do with humanistic theory, but we'll get there. But first, to introduce, they said something called threat rigidity, which they defined as the tendency for people to resort to familiar behaviors when they feel threatened by change. And feeling threatened by change is a very natural emotion, and it's a natural instinct. Is people don't like change psychologically, even though they can grow out of it over time and adapt to it. Now, there's something called the change resistance cycle, where a stress of change reduces people's willingness to adapt, which also mounts pressure to change faster and creates more stress. So, stress makes people less willing to adapt, which increases the pressure to change and the need for change, which increases the stress. And it goes in a feedback cycle, which is um, something that they talked about in the article. Now, at the end of the article, they talked about what it means to be a humanistic leader. And there's some really hard decisions that you're going to have to make, some really unique judgment calls. And they talked about two different types of balancing. There's empathy or compassion, um, and a good humanistic leader is going to be able to balance both. They're not going to pick empathy or compassion and stick to one or the other. They're going to balance both. So they're going to know when just listening is enough to somebody, or when compassion is required, which is taking action, or knowing when action needs to be taken. And a good leader balances both. A line that they said in the article that I really liked was knowing where the line is between like being a leader and becoming your employee's therapist. That's not your job, is to be the therapist. And it also adds extra stress onto the leader when you are constantly playing therapist. So you want a good balance between listening to your employees and also setting boundaries. The second situation that they talked about was balancing psychological safety and intellectual honesty. Both of these are very good to have, but they do tend to clash with each other. So knowing when to balance each other out is the hallmark of a good leader. Psychological safety is knowing when to combat contention, and you don't want to have unnecessary hostile contention thrive in your organization. But intellectual honesty is knowing when to invite open debate. So you can't constantly be coddling them and creating an environment of too much psychological safety, because then you disavow intellectual honesty from entering the atmosphere. And the last video I want to talk about is a TED Talk I watched from Vineet Nayar. I think I'm saying his name right. I hope I am. But basically, he was a former CEO of HCL Tech, which is an IT consulting firm in India. And he had 3 steps for success in the employee's first mindset, which is another, his own version of the humanistic theory. And I really admired how he took his company from struggling to soaring successfully. And I wanted to highlight his 3 steps that he talked about. Number one, he said to create unhappiness with today, with how things are currently done, which basically was his version of saying, explain to your employees why the change needs to happen. Because employees are less likely to, they're more likely to resist change if they don't understand why change needs to occur in the first place. Number two is to define a vision for tomorrow that is so compelling that people seek you out and beg to work with you. I thought that was really important. And number three is high performance teams attempt to do what others consider impossible. I think this is a good closing message because um, in humanistic organizations, we often attempt to do the impossible or what others consider to be the impossible. And this is different from what requires of classical organizations. Different organizations require different approaches, but humanistic um, approach, if it works well for the company, is an investment, but an investment worth well spent. And I think that sums up um, humanistic theory in a great way. There is my works cited, and Thank you.